So somewhere between the world of hope and doom is where Brian and my perception about the future of the design profession is. So if you're feeling positive today, you can say that's mostly hope and a little bit of doom. Feeling kind of down today, there'll be more doom and just a little bit of hope for you. My name is Scott Birkin. Brian Zug and I have been working in the UX and design world for a long time. And we both have had the same dream, the same hope that all the talents that all the designers have everywhere around the world, there has to be a way for that talent to be better utilized. And so our ambition truly deeply is about the future of the world. Of course, product design and user experience design are important, but we also look at how all this fits together and how the role that designers could play in improving our schools and our streets and our governments and our society. And that's part of why this question about design and what makes it hard to do well is so important to us because we want a better world. And that's where the spirit of what we're going to share with you tonight comes from. The one piece of backstory that led to this book is my last book. My last book was about explaining design to everybody. It was a book called How Design Makes the World. It came out in 2020. It was launched right at the beginning of the pandemic, which was so much fun as an author, let me tell you. But this book actually did pretty well. And the goal of the book was very simple, to be the go-to book to explain good design to anybody, to your boss, to your coworkers, to your engineering partner, to your marketing director, to your neighbors, to your family, and to diversify the stories that get told because we tell the same stories over and over again to refresh them and modernize them. And in writing that book, I knew that I wanted to write some other kind of book that was aimed just at designers because this book was written for everybody. I wanted to do something that was aimed at just designers. And then as Brian and I were having these dinner conversations and talking about why is it that there's so many designs that are disappointing in the world, I realized that he and I could collaborate on coming up with a bunch of observations and advice for designers. And that's what this book is. It's written for designers. It comes from a place of love, although a lot of it is tough love, more of the tough kind. And the goal of the book is to capture all the stuff that designers get frustrated by all the time, things we complain about year after year. And instead of allowing them to be things that we avoid or wish didn't happen, to own them and try to reframe those problems into things that we can actually do something about. That invariably leads to talking about power and influence. And the last goal for the book is to get out of the pretense that so much design literature, design books, and documentaries have. We have a lot of pretension, we have a lot of ego, and we wanted to come at this with some fun and not take ourselves too seriously because we think that helps us actually solve some of this problem. Now, for those of you who are on the Substack, you may know originally this book was titled The Design Hero Manifesto. We ran with that and got feedback on our first draft, and everyone kind of hated it. So we destroyed it, set it on fire. It is gone. And now the book is called Why Design is Hard. And for the next 8 minutes, I'm going to give you a run through of some of the core ideas of the book. And then we'll open the floor for your comments, for your questions, for your opinion on why design is hard, but also to hear situations and ways you've encountered the ideas that we're talking about and see what we can learn from you. The first story I want to share with you is a famous one. Some of you may have heard it before. It's the story of the $1.5 million sketch. Now, Paula Scher is one of our most famous and well-respected designers. And she worked for a company called Pentagram that was hired to manage the merger, the brand for the merger of two big banks, two of the biggest banks in America, Citibank and Traveler Bank. And they hired her and she joined the project and she was in the room when a bunch of executives were talking and she was sketching on her notepad on a napkin and came up with this sketch that you see here. And as the story goes, she stood up and said, "Hey, I have your logo. This is it." In design circles, that's where the story ends. She was paid $1.5 million for a sketch. And designers love to tell the story. It comes up a lot about, wow, it's a powerful moment of an epiphany. The problem is that the important parts of the story are usually left out. And the important parts are what we need to know as designers for how you actually make things happen in the world. So the important part of the story, arguably the most important thing about the story is what happened after that sketch was made. There's a fantastic documentary series on Netflix, has a great episode about Paula Scher and her career, and she tells the detailed story about the sketch. And what she explains is she explains what the hard part of design is. She literally is saying why design is hard. And she says the design, which she means the actual sketch, the ideas, is never the hard part. The hard part is persuading people to use it, to get an individual or group of people to be able to see the value of your ideas. And she says there were a million meetings trying to get buy-in. She also shares that many of those meetings were not just about getting buy-in, but were the actual execution of her idea, because a logo has to go in 1,000 different places. There are different color schemes, different sizes, and that detail work had to be done by someone. Now, generally, when designers hear this part of the story, most of us go, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go get buy-in from people. That sounds really annoying and frustrating and time consuming. And we hear the common refrain that we say a lot. Why should I have to? I came up with the idea. Shouldn't that be the most important thing? When you look at this, sometimes this story comes up on Twitter or on Threads, and people go, oh my God, like she got $1.5 million for this sketch. I could draw that sketch. As visual people, we tend to be drawn to the surfaces and go, I could make that. And that's, in our opinion, the wrong way to look at what design really is. Because most of us maybe could draw that sketch, but would most of us be willing to spend 2 years of work to get that idea into the world and do all the things politically, persuading people, convincing people, making allies? If we say no, then what are we really saying about what we need to do to make a better world? Somebody has to do that effort. So if we're saying we're not going to do it, well, then a lot of our ideas will never go anywhere. And Paula Scher herself would say, if she didn't do that work, this sketch would never have been historic. So it's not the sketch itself that actually mattered that much as the story wants us to think that. It's all the other parts that are really the challenge of design work. This leads to a reframing of what design is itself. And most design books, Design of Everyday Things, the famous ones, Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, most design books assume the reader is the decider. That by reading Design of Everyday Things, it assumes you have the power to go and make things that are more usable. It's giving you information about how to make things that make more sense. But what isn't discussed is, what do you do if you don't make the decisions? The word design implies that if you design your house, that you're making the decisions for how everything should go. But in the workplace, a designer and a decider are often not the same thing. The designer is often in a role, even someone with a job title product designer is often in a role where they're really an advisor. They don't define the budget. They don't define the vision for the project. They don't define the goals. They don't define the staffing. They don't define the schedule. They may be able to influence those things, but they're not the decider. And an easy way to know whether you're a decider or not is whether you have to present your ideas to get approval. If you're the person presenting your work to get approval, you're not the decider. If people are presenting to you to get your approval, then you're the decider. And so there's a mismatch in the way we teach designers to think about what design even means. That has far more power and authority than is usually the case. We did a poll a few months ago to vet out some of our ideas and some of our thinking on Twitter, and we gave people 3 ways to answer the question about what makes design hard: understanding the problem, crafting ideas, or working with other people. And you can see the results. The high answer was 57% working with other people. The lowest answer, at an astounding 4.2%, was crafting the ideas. And crafting the ideas is probably the lion's share of design education, design culture, design documentaries, they're always about how the person brainstorm, how they get from mock-up 1 to sketch 3. We focus so much on the craft, even though in practice, the craft is only valuable if you have power or influence. So the question that Brian and I are asking in the book, one of the core themes of the book, is why don't we treat this like a design problem? Why don't we say, yes, this is part of design. Yes, this is part of what we have to do. We have to own this because no one else is going to do this work if we don't. Let's treat it like a design problem. And then we can use all of our design skills about investigation, about explaining ideas, about being persuasive. We make our designs persuasive for users. Why don't we do that with the stuff we present to our coworkers? So that's the core premise of the book. Now, we don't mean making methodologies. Most of the time when you tell a UX person, hey, let's treat work like a design problem, we start making diagrams. And this is a mistake. Brian has this term for the obsession we have with making things. He calls it artifact worship. That we believe if we make these perfect artifacts and perfect diagrams, it will just transform people and make them come around to our point of view. Diagrams don't have that kind of power. And the other problem we have is that most of the time when we do this, we fall into the ego trap of putting ourselves in the center of these methods. So this is a fantastic one where user experience is in the middle, and the business case for the company or whatever this organization is over here in the left corner. like what is going on in this universe that user experience is in the center? Because there's almost no workplace that actually, if you asked any executive or any director level person to draw a diagram of how things work, design and user experience would never be in the center. So we have this habit of assuming that design centricity is natural and normal when there's really no reason to assume or believe that would be the case for most organizations that you'd ever enter. So there's a set of assumptions that we have about the workplaces that we will enter. And most of the books that teach us design heuristics and design methods, they assume we're going to enter a workplace where design is already valued and you don't have to explain UX basics. We assume the business model supports good design, and a lot of business models don't. A lot of business models work great by not having to spend money on a better user experience. It's also assumed there's a healthy process for project level decisions, that budget and staffing decisions are made by sane, rational people who get along. Often that's not true. We assume there's no chronic political problems, that the leader of one group and the leader of another always get along, and it's always like a kumbaya festival where everyone is in love with each other and has shared goals and there's no tension ever. We often assume that people will give up the favorite parts of their job to us. Engineers like to come up with design ideas. Executives love to come up with design ideas. Everybody does. And they enjoy it and think they're good at it. When we show up, it doesn't mean they're going to want to give that away. It's fun. They enjoy doing it. And lastly, that because we are designers, to believe that we should have some privy into strategy that supersedes other roles, opportunities, and value in the strategic process. So we look at this and go, let's stop assuming these things. Let's stop assuming we're going to enter these perfect companies because they don't exist. Instead, we have to treat it like a design problem and say these assumptions are not valid. We have to have different assumptions about what successful design looks like, what skills successful designers should have, and it leads you to different conclusions and different opportunity. Of course, come back around to, why should I have to do this? And the answer is maybe you don't. Maybe you work in a workplace where a lot of those things are sorted out. That's great. Maybe you could decide that you don't want to take on these challenges because it's too stressful. That's also fine. But there's this gap that Paula Scher pointed out. There's this gap somebody has to fill if you want to have the same ambition that Brian and I do about making a world that's better designed. Somebody has to overcome these obstacles because otherwise the world won't improve. The world won't get better. So to wrap up this little opening talk, there's three choices that we have. There's only three. That's a that's a that's a premise we are making in the book. There's three choices we get. Choice A, power. I had that Venn diagram, a designer versus decider. If you feel like someone is making the decisions that should be yours, you need more power. That could include you should move into that role that is currently making those design decisions. Someone is making them. It's just not you in your job title. So choice A is you must get more power. If you have more power, then a lot of these other problems could go away because you don't have to convince people anymore. Option B, you could say, you know what? I don't want to be powerful. Being powerful comes with a lot of responsibility. You don't want that. That's totally fine. Influence. Influence then means you have to realize your success at improving the world, getting your ideas out into the world, will come through other people's power. So you have to learn how to persuade them, build trust, relationships, communication skills. Your job then is largely, probably half of your job is about influence, because you could be a brilliant designer who has zero influence, has no impact. A mediocre designer who has some influence will have some impact. Influence is really the multiplier for design talent. And without it, not much will happen. So that's option B. Option A is power. Option B is influence. There is a third option that we fully support. Option C is to say, I don't want power, too much responsibility. B is influence. You could say, I don't want to be influential. That's too much work. I don't like other people. I became a designer because I just want to make cool stuff and I don't want to deal with organizational politics. Fine. Option C then says you have to accept the limitations of people and organizations. And if you don't want power and you don't want to work on influence, then things are going to stay how they are. And you can accept that and come to peace with it instead of being angry or frustrated because the world hasn't changed. The only way the world changes is through, you can guess, through power and influence. So those are the three core, the core message of the book. And in the book, we explore the different ways to understand power and leverage it as a designer, and how to use influence as a designer and use the skills you have as a designer to your advantage. Because designers have many advantages when it comes to influence that other roles don't have. So instead of having those unrealistic expectations, we're advocating that we reframe this. Yes, you are probably going to explain design basics forever. Why? There's very few designers in the world. There's not that many of us. If we're not willing to explain user experience basics to engineers or executives, no one else will. So if we want that goal from the beginning of a better world and more people who get design, we're the ones who have to do it. We can find ways to make it fun. Second is that politics is human nature. Once you get three people in a room, there's politics. So who owes who a favor, who is better friends with someone, that's just normal. And pretending there's some place that doesn't have it is a foolish assumption. Three, if we see organizations as systems instead of just these bureaucratic, clunky, dysfunctional things, we see them as systems with feedback loops. Then they can be navigated. They can be influenced. You can find spots of leverage. So by reframing our frustrations, there are ways forward. And we think that this is really the future as an internal process for individual designers, but also for design leaders to think more pragmatically about what design is, the reality of the organizations we work in, and also this larger goal of we have to take on the hard challenges if we want better design in the world.